Chapter 1. Why Humanity is the Galaxy's Most Terrifying Warrior Species. A faint hum vibrated through the bridge of the Xenac flagship as Commander Trek leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the screen before him. The flickering transmission, intercepted from a human data relay, played a rapid montage of Earth's military history. Weapons evolving from stone tools to nuclear arms, soldiers charging through muddy trenches, and cities scarred by explosions. A chill settled over Trek as he watched humanity's centuries-long history of conflict unfold. "They call themselves warriors," he muttered, his voice carrying a trace of disbelief. Beside him, his second-in-command, Officer Rakal, shifted uncomfortably, antennae twitching. Rakal was no stranger to violence. He had fought in the bloodiest campaigns of the Xenac Empire, where battles were strictly regimented and honor-bound. But there was nothing structured or noble in the scenes flashing across the screen. "These humans," Rakal began, his voice a careful whisper, "they don't fight like us. They have no restraint, no code. Their conflicts seem endless." Trek said nothing, his jaw clenched as he watched an iconic human moment. A battered army rallying in the dead of winter, fighting through hunger and sickness against insurmountable odds. Humanity, he realized, was dangerous not because of their strength or technology, but because of their relentless will to survive. A voice from the comm echoed through the bridge, breaking the tense silence. "Commander Trek, we have received a response from the human representative, Captain Arlen. He's en route for the diplomatic conference." Trek let out a long breath, pushing away the discomfort that had been gnawing at him. "Very well. Prepare the conference room. I'll meet him there." The Xenac conference chamber was austere, lined with dark metals and dimly lit by an overhead glow that cast everything in sharp, shadowed contrast. As Trek entered, his gaze settled on the lone figure waiting for him. Captain Arlen, humanity's chosen envoy. He was younger than Trek expected, though there was a hardness in his expression that spoke of experience beyond his years. "Commander Trek." Arlen inclined his head in a polite nod, his gaze unwavering. Trek noted the way the man's posture was neither submissive nor arrogant. He stood with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. "Captain Arlen," Trek replied, voice low and steady. "I appreciate your promptness. There is much I wish to discuss." "Likewise," Arlen responded, folding his arms. "Though I must admit, Commander, I'm curious about your interest. Humanity isn't exactly the galaxy's favorite neighbor." Trek's eyes narrowed. "That's precisely why we're speaking now, Captain. The Xenac have long known war, but humanity, you fight as if nothing else matters." "Why?" Arlen let out a short, humorless laugh. "Because sometimes, Commander, there's no other choice. When you're surrounded by threats, natural or otherwise, you learn to fight back. To survive. Survival." Trek's gaze hardened. "You make it sound so simple, yet your methods are anything but." Arlen shrugged, unfazed by the veiled judgment. "We didn't choose war, Commander. It chose us. Earth's history is littered with crises, famine, disease, invasions. We learned to adapt or die. And yes, sometimes that meant taking up arms." A flicker of understanding crossed Trek's face, though he kept his expression impassive. "The Xenac have always adhered to a code of honor in combat. We fight with purpose, discipline. Your approach, it seems reckless." "Reckless?" Arlen tilted his head, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Perhaps. But when survival's on the line, rules and codes can get you killed. We fight to win, Commander. We don't have the luxury of restraint." The words hung heavily in the air, and for a moment, Trek felt a pang of discomfort. For the Xenac, war was a means of maintaining order, a necessary extension of diplomacy. But for humans, war was a last resort, a calculated chaos born from desperation. The silence was interrupted by a beeping sound as Rakal's voice chimed in over Trek's communicator. "Commander, an unidentified vessel is approaching the outer perimeter. It appears to be hostile." Arlen's expression sharpened, his posture shifting as he instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Trek caught the movement, surprised by how quickly the human had reacted. Clearly, Arlen was accustomed to danger. Captain Arlen, it seems you'll have an opportunity to demonstrate your methods, Trek said, rising to his feet. There was a hint of challenge in his voice, though his eyes betrayed a trace of curiosity. Gladly, Arlen replied, a hard edge to his tone. He followed Trek to the bridge, where the approaching vessel filled the view screen. It was an unfamiliar craft, sleek and angular, pulsing with an ominous red glow. They're charging weapons, Rakal reported, his voice tense. Trek assessed the situation, the cool logic of his Xenac training kicking in. Prepare to engage, he ordered. He glanced at Arlen. Captain, your thoughts? Arlen's eyes narrowed as he studied the enemy vessel. They're relying on an intimidation tactic. Notice the flare of their energy output. They want us to hesitate. Trek frowned. And what would you do? Hit first, hit fast. Arlen's voice was calm, but laced with a dangerous edge. It's risky, but they won't expect it. If we can disable their systems, they'll lose their advantage. The Xenac commander hesitated, the plan clashing with his instincts. But there was something in Arlen's gaze, a resolute certainty that left no room for doubt. Trek nodded. Very well. Prepare to strike on my mark. Seconds later, the Xenac ship launched a volley, catching the hostile vessel off guard. The explosion rocked the ship, but Arlen stood steady, his eyes fixed on the screen. The enemy vessel faltered, drifting off course as its systems flickered and failed. As the smoke cleared, Trek turned to Arlen, his expression unreadable. It appears your methods have their merits, Captain. Arlen offered a faint smile, his eyes still sharp. Survival, Commander. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Trek felt a new understanding stirring within him, a realization that perhaps there was more to humanity's chaos than he'd first assumed. Chapter 2. Why Humanity is the Galaxy's Most Terrifying Warrior Species. The Xenac bridge pulsed with a tense silence as Commander Trek studied Captain Arlen, who stood steady in the aftermath of the skirmish. The human had barely flinched through the battle's intensity, his unshaken focus contrasting sharply with the Xenac officers, who now exchanged wary glances. Trek felt a growing curiosity and wariness toward his unexpected ally. We seem to have survived that encounter, Trek said, his voice edged with a guarded respect. Arlen merely nodded. The best way to survive is to keep moving forward, Commander. An enemy with the upper hand expects you to hesitate. It's what gives them their advantage. The tension in the room thickened. Trek didn't entirely trust this man who seemed to thrive in chaos, and yet he could not ignore Arlen's insight. There was a method to the human's defiance of convention, a pragmatic ferocity Trek had rarely seen outside of his own people's legends. Captain, Trek began carefully, tell me, what drives humanity to this relentless struggle? You approach conflict as though it's natural, even necessary. Arlen's expression softened slightly, a rare glimpse of the weight he bore beneath his hardened demeanor. War isn't something we seek, Commander, but it's something we've come to understand, because when you've faced everything from planetary catastrophes to enemies within your own ranks, survival becomes second nature. Humanity learns to fight back, or we wouldn't be here. Trek considered the man's words, weighing them like a seasoned soldier weighing the heft of a blade. But at what cost, Captain? I see records of relentless wars, endless resources spent, scars that will never fully heal. Arlen's gaze darkened, but he didn't flinch. Yes, there's a cost, and yes, we bear it. But each conflict has taught us resilience, unity, and to adapt in ways no manual could capture. It's why we're here, even when the odds say we shouldn't be. The low thrum of the ship's engines filled the silence that followed, underscoring the weight of Arlen's words. Trek was beginning to see that this alliance offered more than he'd bargained for. Still, the Xenac commander couldn't deny the discomfort twisting through him. This was not how they'd trained to face battle or even diplomacy, but the human strategies were disturbingly effective. Commander, Officer Rakal interjected, stepping forward with a datapad in hand. We have received reports of enemy scout ships moving toward our borders. It's likely an early advance force. Arlen's gaze sharpened. His interest immediately piqued. Scouts? That's no simple border patrol. They're gathering information, testing our defenses. Trek glanced at Rakal. who nodded in agreement. Captain, I would hear your assessment. How would humanity face this? Arlen's lips curved in a faint, calculating smile. We'd start by turning the tables. Instead of waiting for them to attack, we'd send out a squadron of scouts, draw them into a false position. Once their movement is predictable, we strike where they least expect it. The Xenac officers exchanged skeptical glances, but Trek raised a hand to silence their unspoken concerns. You propose luring the enemy into a vulnerable position? Exactly. And we'd ensure they're overconfident by the time they realize they're walking into an ambush. Arlen replied, a sharp glint in his eye. It's not the force of the strike, Commander, but the element of surprise. Though Trek was cautious of this bold suggestion, he couldn't deny the potential advantage. Recall, prepare a squadron and execute Captain Arlen's plan. As Recall moved to relay the order, Trek turned to Arlen, studying the human's face. Tell me, Captain, he said quietly, how did humanity become this adaptable? There's more here than the drive for survival. Arlen's gaze drifted to the viewport, where stars stretched across the void in an endless sprawl. When you're outnumbered, outgunned, and every inch of land you claim comes at a steep price, you learn to think in ways your enemies can't predict. Humanity's strength lies in seeing opportunity where others see defeat. In that moment, Trek felt he understood a sliver of the human psyche. This species didn't just survive. They thrived in uncertainty, honing themselves like tempered steel in the fires of endless trials. He was beginning to see that humanity's true power lay not in their weaponry or tactics, but in their ability to adapt under pressure, to transform every struggle into fuel for growth. The alert from Recall Station shattered the stillness. Commander, we're picking up multiple incoming vessels. They've taken the bait. Trek's expression tightened as he turned to Arlen. Then let us see if your strategy lives up to your reputation. The Xenac and human officers moved to their stations as the enemy ships came into view, an aggressive V formation emerging from the darkness like predatory shadows. Trek took a steadying breath, casting a sidelong glance at Arlen, who seemed oddly at ease amidst the rising tension. Arlen's voice cut through the hum of preparations. Wait until they're well within range, then fire in bursts. If you stagger the shots, it'll confuse their systems, make them think we're using a larger force. Recall hesitated, looking to Trek for confirmation. With a nod, Trek gave the order, watching as the Xenac crews executed Arlen's plan with military precision. The bursts of laser fire lashed out in a controlled rhythm, slicing through the darkness and catching the enemy's ships off guard. Arlen's prediction held true. The enemy faltered, thrown off balance by the seemingly erratic barrage. One of the enemy's ships spiraled, its hull breaching under the assault, and the rest scattered, retreating as quickly as they'd appeared. The Xenac officers erupted into murmurs of astonishment, and even Recall looked at Arlen with newfound respect. Trek allowed himself a rare smile. You've given us a victory, Captain, but I'm still struggling to understand what drives humanity to such extremes. Arlen turned to him, his face shadowed, but his eyes fierce. We've been forced to the brink countless times, Commander. It taught us one truth: adapt or vanish. For a brief moment, Trek felt the weight of humanity's existence press upon him, the immeasurable strength forged from relentless hardship. He looked away, unsure how to respond to the intensity he saw in Arlen's eyes. Captain Arlen, he said finally, it seems I have much to learn about humanity's path. Perhaps, Arlen replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. But for now, let's focus on what we both understand best: survival. With that, the Xenac and human officers exchanged looks of solidarity. For the first time, Trek felt a glimmer of confidence in this unlikely alliance. The path ahead would be perilous, but he had seen a side of humanity that was both inspiring and daunting. As the two commanders prepared for the next encounter, the stars beyond the viewport glimmered coldly, a reminder of the galaxy's unforgiving nature and of the strength required to survive within it. Chapter 3: Humanity's Fearless Strategy. The bridge of the Xenac warship vibrated with controlled tension as Commander Trek paced before the central display, his eyes trained on the holographic readout. The successful ambush they'd executed alongside Captain Arlen had sent ripples through their ranks, sparking both hope and apprehension. But Trek knew the battle was far from over. The enemy fleet had regrouped with surprising speed, gathering a formidable force on the Xenac border. The message was clear. They would retaliate fiercely, testing the newly formed alliance between Xenac and humanity. Trek turned to Arlen, who stood with arms crossed, observing the fleet movements with unsettling calm. "Captain," Trek began, his voice low, "they're coming at us with numbers we cannot match. This alliance was based on the hope that together we might survive, but I need to know, how far is humanity willing to go to win?" Arlen's eyes flickered, the faintest hint of a smirk breaking his stoic expression. "We're willing to do whatever it takes, Commander. But it's not just about what we're willing to sacrifice. It's about strategy." "Strategy?" Trek echoed, uncertain. "You mean there's a way to face a fleet 5 times our size without reinforcements?" Arlen nodded, glancing at the map. "Numbers can mean little when you play the field right. We draw them into a trap of our own making." Trek frowned. "The ambush you orchestrated last time was effective, but it only gave us a temporary advantage. What do you propose this time?" Arlen stepped forward, pulling up a tactical map of the sector. He traced his finger over the dense asteroid field nearby. "This sector has natural defenses that we can use. Asteroids, gravity wells, debris fields. We lure them in, force them into these tight spaces. If we can isolate their squadrons, the chaos will work in our favor." The Xenac officers exchanged uneasy glances, and Recall, always the voice of pragmatism, spoke up. "Commander, the plan sounds risky. Even with our combined forces, the casualties could be devastating." "Devastating, but necessary," Arlen replied, meeting Recall's gaze. "Your people are courageous fighters, but sometimes courage needs cunning. In my experience, victory is often about what the other side doesn't see coming." Recall's face remained tense, yet he nodded, clearly understanding the weight of Arlen's words. Trek looked at Arlen with newfound respect and a hint of trepidation. "Very well, Captain. We'll implement your strategy. But know this. If you lead us into defeat, Xenac will not forget. We're staking the lives of countless soldiers on your methods." Arlen's gaze was unwavering. "I understand, Commander. But if we play this right, we'll give them something they won't forget." Orders rippled through the ship as Trek authorized Arlen's plan. Xenac and human ships moved in coordinated maneuvers, positioning themselves within the asteroid field, their forms hidden among the shadows of floating rock and debris. The Xenac crews worked with silent efficiency, though the tension was palpable. They were taking a chance on an untested alliance and on a human who thrived on unconventional tactics. As the enemy fleet began to close in, Trek's anxiety sharpened. The enemy's ships were powerful, their formation tight and imposing as they crossed into the asteroid belt's outer rim. Trek took a steadying breath, casting a glance at Arlen. The human captain's face was a mask of concentration, his eyes scanning the tactical display with predatory focus. "Wait for it," Arlen murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The enemy's vanguard slipped into the field, the ships scattering to avoid asteroid collisions. Suddenly, a Xenac destroyer emerged from behind a large rock, its plasma cannons firing in a devastating volley that tore into the lead enemy ship, leaving it crippled. "Now!" Arlen barked. "Engage!" In perfect synchronization, the hidden Xenac and human ships burst from their positions, unleashing a carefully coordinated barrage of firepower. The asteroid field turned into a chaotic battlefield, with enemy ships struggling to maneuver through the tight spaces. The limited visibility and proximity to the massive rocks hindered their movements, forcing them to break formation. Trek watched as Arlen's plan unfolded. Enemy ships veered erratically, colliding with asteroids or each other in their desperation to escape the trap. It was warfare unlike any he had seen, a dance of calculated destruction, orchestrated by the human captain who now directed their every move. "Target their command ship," Arlen ordered, pointing at a heavily armored vessel near the center of the enemy formation. "Without it, they'll lose coordination." Xenac ships closed in, their combined firepower converging on the command ship. The enemy retaliated, but their shots went wide, their systems struggling under the onslaught. With a final barrage, the command ship exploded, its debris scattering through the field. The enemy fleet faltered, their movements chaotic without a central command. One by one, the Xenac and human ships picked them off until the remaining enemy vessels fled into the void. The bridge was silent as the last enemy ship disappeared from the display. The Xenac officers stared at Arlen, a mixture of awe and disbelief in their expressions. Trek felt the weight of what had just transpired settle over him. They had survived an encounter that by all logic should have ended in their defeat, and it was all due to the audacity of this human strategy. Trek turned to Arlen, his voice thick with the emotions he rarely allowed himself to show. "Captain Arlen, I have never seen such tactics. You turned the impossible into victory." Arlen met his gaze, a faint but proud smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes, Commander, survival demands that you embrace the unexpected. The moment we see conflict as only a contest of brute strength is the moment we lose." Recall, visibly shaken but respectful, stepped forward. "Captain Arlen, your tactics, they saved countless lives today. I had my doubts, but I see now why humanity is so feared in combat." Arlen placed a steady hand on Rakal's shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "Fear isn't our goal, officer. But if it stops our enemies in their tracks, then we're doing something right." As the crew moved to assess the damage and regroup, Trek felt a profound sense of gratitude and respect for this human who had shown them a new path to victory. This alliance had begun as a calculated necessity, but now he sensed a deeper bond forming between them, one forged in the crucible of shared struggle and unlikely triumph. The silence on the bridge held an undercurrent of relief and awe, a recognition of the unexpected alliance that had just proven itself against insurmountable odds. Trek allowed himself a rare smile, one filled with the hope that perhaps, in humanity, they had found more than just an ally. They had found a means of survival that could reshape their entire understanding of warfare. "Captain," Trek said, his voice soft but resolute, "it appears we have much to learn from each other." Arlen nodded, his gaze meeting Trek's with a knowing glint. "And I suspect, Commander, that this is only the beginning." Chapter 4. The Tide of Unity. The bridge of the Xenac flagship hummed with activity, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Commander Trek scanned the data display with an intensity born of desperation. The enemy was regrouping faster than anticipated. The decisive victory they just won had bought them time, but not safety. A second wave of enemy forces now threatened their position, even more overwhelming than the last. Captain Arlen stood beside him, calm and focused, his gaze piercing as he reviewed the tactical layout. Trek admired Arlen's composure, though it puzzled him. How could this human face certain annihilation with such cool detachment? "Captain," Trek said finally, "we may not survive another onslaught. I must know, are there any further tricks that humanity can pull out of thin air?" Arlen's eyes flickered with a hint of humor, though his voice remained somber. "Not tricks, Commander. Just a last option." He turned to his crew, a spark of determination lighting his gaze. "Prepare to initiate the Plan B protocols. We may only get one chance." The Xenac officers exchanged wary glances. Trek's curiosity, tinged with unease, grew. "Plan B?" "Captain Arlen, I assumed your tactics were exhausted with the last ambush." Arlen shook his head, pointing to the array of Xenac and human ships that still held position, albeit in ragged formation. "No, Commander. Plan B is not a tactic. It's a stand. It's about forcing the enemy to make a choice." He gestured to his communications officer. "Send a wideband message to the enemy fleet. Let them know we're open to negotiation." Trek's eyes widened. "You're offering surrender?" Arlen shook his head. "Not surrender. A stand. Sometimes, the most dangerous warrior is the one who's willing to stop fighting and stand face to face with his enemy." The communications officer hesitated, then complied, broadcasting the message. Moments ticked by, filled with the tense silence of anticipation. Finally, The screen flared to life, and an enemy commander's face appeared, a gaunt figure with cold, calculating eyes that narrowed as he studied the human and Xenac leaders. So, the commander sneered. The Xenac and their new human allies wished to discuss terms. How uncharacteristically cowardly. Arlen stepped forward, his expression steady. We're offering you a chance to end this without further bloodshed. You've seen what we're capable of. This alliance will hold, and we will fight until the end if necessary. The enemy commander laughed, the sound hollow. You think a few clever maneuvers can match the might of our forces? You're delaying the inevitable. Arlen's voice held a steely edge. Then come and see what happens when humanity stands its ground. He gestured to the view beyond the ship. You'll face a united front, Commander. Not just Xenac or human, but something new, something stronger. Trek, watching the exchange, found himself struck by the unwavering confidence in Arlen's tone. The enemy commander fell silent, his gaze flickering uncertainly. What are you offering? The enemy commander asked, skepticism woven into his voice. Leave, Arlen replied. Take your forces and withdraw beyond the border. If you stay, we will defend our homeworlds, even at the cost of our lives. But know that the price will be higher than you imagine. The enemy commander hesitated, the conflict etched across his face. This defiance was not what he'd expected, and it was clear that he recognized the determination in Arlen's words. But after a beat, his eyes hardened. So be it, he replied coldly, terminating the transmission. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Trek turned to Arlen, a flicker of fear breaking through his stoic facade. Captain, was that truly the best course of action? Now, we face certain attack without any retreat. Arlen gave a slow nod, his expression resolute. Sometimes, Commander, standing together in the face of death can force an enemy to reconsider his motives. Unity, true unity, is more intimidating than brute force. Moments later, proximity alarms blared. The enemy fleet was advancing, their ships spreading in a tight formation, weapons ready. Arlen's gaze hardened. It's time, Commander. Together, the human and Xenac fleets aligned in perfect formation, blocking any path to retreat. Weapons hummed, shields blazed, and every crew member, from Xenac officers to human pilots, stood ready. The seconds stretched painfully as the enemy fleet closed in. But just before the first shot could be fired, a transmission blinked onto the screen. The enemy commander's face reappeared, his eyes narrowed, but there was a newfound respect there. Captain Arlen, he said slowly, almost begrudgingly, it seems you've convinced me of your determination. We'll withdraw for now, but make no mistake, this isn't over. Arlen nodded, a faint smile of victory crossing his face. Then we'll be here, waiting. With a curt nod, the enemy commander's image faded, and the massive fleet began to turn, retreating to the dark reaches of space. The bridge erupted in cheers, relief flooding the tense atmosphere. Trek turned to Arlen, admiration and gratitude filling his gaze. Captain, you took an impossible situation and defused it without firing a single shot. I underestimated you, and I see now the strength in your kind. Arlen inclined his head, his expression humble. Thank you, Commander. Today, we proved something together. That strength doesn't always lie in the weapon you wield, but in the courage to stand for what's right, no matter the cost. Recall, stepping forward, added, you've changed our view of humanity. This alliance, it is something we will honor. Arlen clasped Trek's arm in a rare gesture of friendship. Today, we became more than allies. We're survivors, bound by the understanding that we are stronger together than apart. As the Xenac fleet moved to regroup, the bridge quieted, each crew member understanding that they had shared a pivotal moment. Humanity and Xenac had proven themselves formidable partners, not through sheer might, but through shared will and indomitable resolve. The silence was one of unity and determination, the promise of an alliance forged not by convenience, but by a shared belief in something greater.